In May 2024, Donald Trump became the first former US president to be convicted on felony charges. And 2 days later, he made an unexpected first public appearance at a UFC event.
Donald Trump is in the building, and the former president getting a standing ovation from the assembled masses here at UFC 302.
The UFC, or Ultimate Fighting Championship, is the world's premier mixed martial arts league. In mixed martial arts, or MMA, it's a sport where grown men and women beat the living crap out of one another.
But his arm's broken. His arm's broken. You saw when it snapped. Yeah. I mean, it's limp. It's limp by his side, even though he's protesting.
Trump entered the arena flanked by Secret Service agents. Kid Rock's American Badass played in the background. The crowd chanted his name, and also, fuck Joe Biden. And UFC President Dana White was by his side the entire time.
Ushered in by UFC CEO Dana White.
Boy, the round of applause he's getting right now is pretty staggering. And you had to imagine that's what was going to happen.
Now you would think that it would be politically risky for the UFC to host the former president, just days after he became a felon, and in the middle of his roller coaster 2024 campaign. But Trump and the UFC, they go way back.
President Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump, President Donald Trump with us here for UFC 290.
And the support that he has in this arena tonight, this group is going to blow up.
The former president and the UFC have a relationship that spans decades. From a glance, this may look innocuous, just a bombastic organization rubbing shoulders with a bombastic politician. But that's not the whole story. This is In the Red Corner, a 3-part audio series about the UFC, Donald Trump, and the violent politics that unite them. I'm Karim Zidan. I'm an investigative reporter, and I've spent the last decade covering the intersection of sports and politics. I've uncovered stories about corruption and authoritarianism, and how some of the world's most notorious dictators use sports as a means to gain power and control. And I'm here to tell you that the relationship between Trump and the UFC is a story I've seen before. One where strong men love buddying up to strong men. On In the Red Corner, we're going to unpack the relationship between Trump and the UFC. We'll go back to the league's inception and explain how Trump gave the UFC legitimacy as politicians tried to shut it down. We'll hear how the UFC helped Trump's presidential campaigns and tapped championship fighters to help boost his allure. And we'll discuss what MMA had to do with the January 6th Capitol insurrection, and how the UFC still doubled down on Trump and rehabilitated his image running up to the 2024 election. In the Red Corner lifts the veil on how the UFC plays a key role in US politics. And in a country that feels like it's coming apart at the seams, this matters. Because something's at stake when powerful leaders buddy up to powerful fighters. The success of a billion-dollar company, the political views of millions of impressionable young men, and, potentially, US democracy itself. Some of you listening may watch your favorite fighters every Saturday night, so you know that fighting, it's about using force to control others. This is something Trump knows a lot about. To really understand this, we need to go back to the very beginning. When the UFC was founded in the early 90s, it set out to answer one simple question that at that point was unclear. Which martial arts discipline was best? Was it the wrestler, the jiu-jitsu grappler, the boxer, the karate specialist?
Sports Arena, the site of tonight's landmark martial arts event. 8 of the deadliest fighters in the world will meet in a no-holds-barred combat to determine who is the ultimate fighting champion. Be forewarned, there are no rules, no judges' scores, and no time limits.
Back then, there was a proliferation of traditional martial arts all claiming to be more effective than one another. This competition would settle the score.
1993 Sabaki Challenge heavyweight champion in Taekwondo, Art Jimerson, IBF North American Cruiser Boxing Champion, Gerard Jourdaud.
The competition had next to no rules. You couldn't eye poke, and you couldn't fish hook, meaning no fingers in your opponent's mouth. Everything else was fair game.
Kathy, what do you think? Let's go low.
I think we're just missing teeth there.
8 street tough warriors wage combat in a battle where anything can happen and probably will.
Makes me feel like a teenager hearing that, actually.
That's Luke Thomas. He's one of the biggest MMA analysts and was reminiscing on watching UFC 1.
And so I'll never forget, we went to a Blockbuster Video, and I rented UFC 4 was actually the first one that I saw. And then I backdated and got the other ones. And that was one particular summer where I just binged on all of that. And that was one of those moments where you're like, I didn't know it at the time, but basically, my life would be quite different after that.
I think I was a little bit too young to watch the first UFC live.
And that's Sam Egan, a prominent journalist known for his reporting on MMA as well as the far right.
But I remember watching it on YouTube in the very early YouTube days with my brother, like highlights of Tank Abbott fighting that sumo wrestler getting kicked in the face by the Savant guy. I must have been like 11 or 12 years old and being really, really drawn to just like the intensity of it and the theatrics of it. It's sort of like every teenage kid who grew up watching blood sports like wet dream.
At the time, the UFC was emerging as an underground phenomenon. It changed the focus in many martial arts studios, from tradition and discipline to what actually works in the ring. It jump-started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, back then known as Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, named after the UFC 1 winner. It drove kids like Luke and Sam into combat sports themselves. It may have been niche and countercultural, but it was popular enough that it even made it onto the show Friends.
Uh-oh, Bruiser has Becker on the canvas and is going for his favorite area.
Oh! Wait, if that's his favorite area, why is he being so mean to it?
Oh, this is ironic. Of your last 2 boyfriends, Richard didn't want to have kids, and from the looks of it, now Pete can't.
Back then, people didn't even call it mixed martial arts. They just called it ultimate fighting. What they were sold on was the violence of it all, especially as young men.
I think it began to put in my head this idea of being able to control violence a little bit, like being able to quite literally put your hands on it and control it and take some of the scariness out of it.
I remember kind of discovering that I could take out my anger and quote unquote hurt people. And instead of getting in trouble for it, like I would in school, the coach being like, hey, good job, man. It didn't feel crazy anymore to feel that way. It was other people felt that way and other people saw the beauty and the brutality.
Now, the sport was still relatively small, but its violent nature attracted tons of attention, including from the U.S. government.
It's a brutal sport, no doubt, but it's the move by some, including Arizona Senator John McCain, to ban ultimate fighting, taking it too far.
Opponents, like Senator John McCain, who once famously called it human cockfighting, say the thing is barbaric. Well, joining us...
Barbaric it was. Here's the late senator recalling his introduction to the sport.
The first look that I had at martial arts fighting, there was people knocking them other down, sitting on top of them and smashing them in the face. There was no referee, there was nothing. It was terrible.
And to many legislators, McCain seemed right. By the late 90s, 36 states passed laws banning no-holds-barred fighting. This meant the UFC could only host events in a handful of small rural states. So by 2001, the UFC was on the brink of being regulated out of existence and of going bankrupt. Enter Dana White.
Gentlemen who join me now, Dana White, president of the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Dana, congratulations on your first show. That's got to feel good.
Thank you very much, James. I appreciate it. We're very excited. We got a sellout crowd here, 5,000 people, revved and ready to go.
They are certainly revved. They are certainly ready.
Dana, as he's commonly referred to, had come a long way to become the president of the UFC. More than 20 years earlier, Dana was a Boston-based boxercise instructor who made his way to Vegas and became a manager for fighters like UFC champion Tito Ortiz. And through a contract dispute with UFC brass, he heard about the organization's financial troubles. So he told his old high school friends, Frank and Lorenzo Fertitta. The Fertittas were billionaire heirs to a Las Vegas casino fortune. They were also, like Dana, combat sports fanatics. And though they were advised against the investment, and friends and family told them they were crazy, the brothers decided to buy the UFC. Here's Dana talking about the purchase.
So Lorenzo fucking reached out to Bob Meyerowitz, and a month and a half later, we own the UFC for $2 million.
Now, I don't want to count.
Hold on. Okay, so you buy it for $2 million. It's worth what now?
Now?
Yeah.
12, 13 billion.
Okay. Okay. That's a good return. Okay. Okay.
It sounds great now, but we went through a lot of shit to get here.
That's what I want to hear.
Dana's not exaggerating about the numbers, by the way. Fighting may have just been a hobby of theirs, a much less serious business than their casino empire, but the Fertittas were not joking around. On top of their initial $2 million investment, they put another $44 million into the business, and they brought in Dana as the president and public-facing figurehead of the organization, and gave him a 10% stake. Dana was also not joking around. He was brash, relentless, and loved profanity. This attracted a young male audience. They were done with the sterile corporate talk of other sports leagues. They wanted to watch someone unapologetically masculine on TV.
The first 3 years of this company was just an every day when I came in here, it was war. And that's literally what I did. I'd stand yell on the phone, f*** you, f*** you. You know, people think I swear a lot now. You should have heard me the first 3 years of this company.
But outside of just bulldozing their way towards success, Dana and the Fertittas knew where their value add was. They were well connected in Nevada, already known as a boxing mecca, and they leveraged their network and connections at the State Athletic Commission to get the UFC sanctioned. Soon the UFC was allowed back on pay-per-view and began reaching a wider audience. Here's MMA analyst Luke Thomas describing the UFC's transformation.
The UFC learned a very, very important lesson early on, which was you must have government favor. Like, you must have it, right? In part because being an outlaw entity can be good for branding for a little while, but ultimately will spell your ruin. However, they took it a step further. What they realized was it's not just that you can't be on the wrong side of government, but you need to the extent possible, shape it to your interests.
The UFC would soon find a future politician to shape, because before the league's breakout moment, there was a particular partnership that helped raise it out of the ashes. At least, that's how the lore goes.
Donald Trump, the multi-millionaire real estate developer.
Billionaire developer Donald Trump has put his name on a New York City hotel.
This is Donald Trump, 33 years old. And some people think that he wants to buy the World Trade Center, the 110-story Manhattan skyscraper.
The Donald Trump of the 80s and 90s was not the Donald Trump we know today. No Make America Great Again, no immigrants eating cats. He was a real estate magnate, a wealthy New York socialite whose celebrity was on the rise. He appeared in Home Alone 2 and The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and would go on talk shows like Oprah and Larry King. And Dana and the Fertitta brothers, they were looking for somewhere to host the first UFC events under their ownership. Somewhere to reintroduce the league to the public. Somewhere that would actually want to host human cockfighting.
In the UFC, tonight at the Trump Taj Mahal in Atlantic City, New Jersey, Michael D. Pasquale.
Trump was already experienced in putting on boxing events, so he agreed to host 2 consecutive UFC shows on his Atlantic City property, the Trump Taj Mahal. It was not a one-way deal. Announcers mentioned the venue location before the main events, and ceiling banners displayed Trump's name to viewers at home. Still, journalist Sam Egan thinks Trump stuck his neck out when he didn't have to, that his love for combat sports was sincere.
There's not a lot of benefit for him in the early 2000s for him to jump into MMA. I think the type of person that Trump is, that's someone who really is a showman, who really loves the glitz and the glamour of, sort of the fighting world. It was clear that he genuinely saw something in this that he enjoyed.
What was important for the UFC was that it worked. The events were so popular that Dana has said that they were the reason the UFC regained its foothold in the states it had been banned in. It was Trump, White claims, that gave the UFC its first shot.
When we first bought this company, one of the other things that people probably don't think about that didn't want us was venues. Venues didn't want us. And Donald Trump was the first guy that gave us our shot. We did the Trump Taj Mahal. Our first 2 shows were there. Not only did he give us the shot at the Trump Taj Mahal, he showed up at the events. Yeah, so Donald Trump, again, say what you want about him. The guy saw this thing coming, was into it, and gave us our first shot, and you'll never hear me say anything bad about Trump.
Dana loves to tell this story, about how Trump helped the UFC during its darkest days. But really, how important was Trump to the UFC's early success? Here's what Luke Thomas has to say.
It's real but overstated. it didn't make or break their fortunes one way or the other. But if you're an organization and you're kind of drowning a little bit and then someone throws you an easy lifeline, you probably are going to be looking on that historically very fondly, even if, what role ultimately did it play in its broader change, and probably quite minimal, honestly. But I can at least see why the organization views it so favorably.
Whether or not Trump's involvement was pivotal to the UFC's success, UFC brass were still smart to coax Trump's ego, to paint him as an integral part of the organization's history, to gain favor with a growing national figure. The UFC and Trump's business dealings ended after those two events at the Taj Mahal. In the following years, both blossomed. The UFC began going mainstream in the late 2000s and early 2010s. They brought in superstars like Brock Lesnar and Ronda Rousey and signed broadcast deals with Fox. And they created the hit reality show The Ultimate Fighter, which also brought Dana's personality into the spotlight.
It's not all fucking signing autographs and banging broads when you get out of here. So the question is, do you want to be a fucking fighter? That is my question. And only you know that.
And Trump also emerged during those years. He dabbled in politics and became a reality TV star on the hit show The Apprentice.
You're fired.
And although the two went their separate ways, White's loyalty to Trump never waned. After all, it was Trump who had given them their first shot. So 15 years later, when Trump accepted the Republican presidential nomination, he called in a favor.
American businessman and president of the Ultimate Fighting Championship Mixed Martial Arts Organization, Dana White.
What's up, GOP? Good evening, everyone. My name is Dana White. I am the president of the Ultimate Fighting Championship.
You've been listening to In the Red Corner. It's hosted by me, Karim Zidan, and is produced by Elie Bleier. This episode was scored using Blue Dot Sessions. Have any thoughts or questions, or things you think we got wrong? Head to sportspolitica.news and join in on the conversation. And if you enjoyed this podcast and want to continue supporting independent journalism, you can become a member of Sportspolitica for just $5 a month. So visit sportspolitica.news. That's Sportspolitica with a K. .news. Thanks for listening. Until next time.